All right.
Going
You're
live.
not, you fool.
We're
You
going
don't have to
live.
mean it.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, January 6th. This is part 2 of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We are joined right now by TJ Poor from the who's Director of Planning at Department of Public Service to help us with the Comprehensive Energy Plan. So we started yesterday on the Climate Action Plan, which was developed, the 2 cycles in terms of planning lined up almost exactly. And so we have the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which by statute is revised every 6 years, coming pretty much into sync with the creation of the first edition of the Climate Action Plan. And so I wanted to, ask for Mr. Poor to help us understand what's in the Comprehensive Energy Plan and also how to use it, because we have the challenge of having roughly 600 pages of reports to digest and use in as we work our way through energy policy for the balance of this session. So with that, good to see you again, Mr. Poor. Thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And yeah, hopefully we can use the energy plan in concert with the climate action plan. I do think they work in parallel and in tandem. They were developed in parallel and leveraging each other. So I plan to kind of give an overview of what's in the plan, how it was created, and how it overlaps with the action plan, and dive into what's in it. I have about 15 to 20 slides that I'll present, and there should be plenty of time for questions here. So
Great.
I am going to try and share my screen.
And just so the committee knows, other than Peter Sterling wanted to talk to us a little bit about this, who's going to be our batting last, but we basically have the next hour and a half to spend on this. So although it's a lot of material, we do not have to rush. And of course, we can invite Mr. Poor back, probably to dig into particular aspects in more depth. So, but this will be a great way to get started. Thank you.
Right. And yeah, when I go through the sectors, it is really high level today. And so if we want to dive into any particular recommendation or issue, we can start to do that today, but I'm sure there'll be more. And I do want to just note that before I start, that the plan is still a draft. We released a draft a little before Thanksgiving and have been taking public comment through 5 in-person sessions and a couple of online sessions to hear what folks say, and then got dozens of really good written comments that we're responding to. And I'll try and summarize a few of those towards the end of the presentation.
Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, let me try and make it bigger. Is it big enough like this, or?
Fine on my end. If you go to slideshow without the panels on the side, we'll get a little more real estate.
Okay. There we go. Okay, so where I always start when I talk about the energy plan is that it's really rooted in Vermont energy policy in section 202A of Title 30, which calls for the state to meet its energy service needs adequately, sustainably, affordably, cost effectively, and achieving its greenhouse gas reduction requirements. And as you all know, those principles don't always line up and row in the same direction. Sometimes they're in conflict. And one of the main goals of this energy plan anyway, but energy plans in general, I think, is to try and balance those goals and articulate the trade-offs in a transparent way and forge a path forward. we just talked about the energy plan and the climate action plan, both being in development over the last year. And there is a lot of overlap between the two plans. The Global Warming Solutions Act required the energy plan to be consistent with the climate action plan, also required the CAP, the climate action plan, to be consistent with the energy plan, or to be informed by the energy plan was the exact wording, I believe. And so they have this kind of symbiotic relationship. And with the Agency of Natural Resources, in service of the Climate Council, we've worked together on a lot of aspects of it. But the overlap is really in that center bubble here. You may have seen this slide before, but cost-effective greenhouse gas reductions requirements, and then energy sector analysis and policy scenarios and pathways. We really coordinated the modeling efforts and the public engagement efforts. So the Department of Public Service hosted technical workshops in the summer, and then which involved members of the cross-sector mitigation committee in the planning and design. And then the department was involved in the climate action plans design and public workshops through the summer and fall. And so that we could both learn from each other's, the input we were each getting. But what's different is the energy plan speaks to renewable energy development. We do have a requirement for an electric plan also. So it is the state's electric plan. So you'll see a couple chapters on related to electric service liability. Of course, that overlaps now more and more with meeting our thermal and transportation needs. Broad energy system planning with the parameters of 202A, and then also standards for local planning. So that's Act 174 of 2016, I believe, required or allowed for enhanced energy planning by regional planning commissions and municipalities to one of the goals of that was to allow for substantial deference if their energy plans have been approved to and adopted to in siting matters before the utility commission. What our energy plan doesn't address are climate adaptation, non-energy greenhouse gas emissions, sequestration, and a greenhouse gas inventory review. And on the greenhouse gas inventory review, I just want to stop there for a second, is just the energy plan really looks to the climate action plans process and accounting for emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and relies on that. The Science and Data Committee of the Climate Action Plan did a review that and I was a co-chair along with Jared Duvall of that subcommittee, who reviewed the inventory and provided guidance and feedback on a technical report that was conducted by Energy Futures Group, and so which confirmed that the inventory was consistent with other states. It was a good inventory, and we should continue to do it, but that we also should investigate doing supplemental analysis, life cycle analysis, upstream analysis, to really better understand and have more decision aids, more help understanding our broader emissions impact. That said, progress towards our GWSA requirements are measured by the inventory and the consumption-based inventory that we have now. The inbound, I'm sorry, I said consumption-based, that's not what it is. In-boundary inventory as it is now. Emissions within our geographic borders.
Pardon me, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I don't know if Senator McCormick can hear me, but if you need to take a call during the meeting, if you could step off, sort of step out of our meeting, that would be helpful. I don't know that he can hear. Maybe Jude, you can assist with that. Sorry for the interruption. Please go ahead, Mr. Poor.
That's okay. So just quickly on the timeline, we've been at this for over a year now. We're starting on the modeling in the fall, early winter of 2020. Starting with stakeholder engagement, we had meetings with all the regional planning commissions and municipalities in May and June to get a better read on their needs as it relates to the Act 174 standards. I mentioned the topical stakeholder groups. So we had one for each sector in the summer, and then public engagement via the Climate Action Plan, September and November. We are at the stage where we're responding to and reviewing the public comments I talked about, and we'll be late next week, hopefully adopting a energy plan. I mentioned the modeling, and I think this was, I may have mentioned this last spring in this committee, but I'm really excited about the LEAP modeling. It's a scenario-based modeling tool that really can be used to track energy consumption. So not only do we have now mitigation scenarios that we can use to, test questions and really sharpen the questions that we want to ask. What happens if, and what if how do we meet our goals, and what are the technologies and the technologies that need to be in place in order for us to meet our goals. They are the types of questions that can answer. But I'm really excited about the LEAP modeling because it's going to be a product that we have a license to going forward, and that we can use to help track progress and modify as we are ahead or behind from our goals in the next year or two. We can then use it to adjust and say, this is now the new pace that we need to meet. It has been developed. It started with the department in terms of a business as usual scenario, and we vetted that through the Science and Data Committee, and then ultimately transferred that to the Climate Action Plan process and Energy Futures Group to model more scenarios than the department had modeled. And ultimately, we have one model for both the Climate Action Plan and the Comprehensive Energy Plan, one set of data, one set of results. So I think that will be very useful going forward.
Sounds like a sound way to proceed to have the same data going through. Can I ask a quick question? So one is, does this replace REMI, or is this sort of an enhanced REMI?
No, it is. It's more of a input-output tracking model. REMI essentially takes the results from LEAP and says, okay, here are the costs and benefits, the costs to implement these measures to Vermont, and here are the fuel savings. And then REMI that's an output of this model. And then REMI takes that and then can say, here's the broader, GDP impact, jobs impact, real disposable income impact, et cetera.
Okay.
So what in the Climate Action Plan, the Cadmus group, the technical consultant with EFG, the subcontractor, used IMPLAN, which is kind of a similar model to REMI, does the same type of stuff that REMI does to take the outputs of the LEAP model and estimate economic impacts.
Okay. I'm guessing you must be working with Ms. Manchester and other folks at JFO. Are you using, I know she's talking about GWSA has them, as she said, on the hook to do economic impact analysis. Are they working with you and using LEAP plus REMI so that we're all using the same data?
So I know that I know I've missed a couple of meetings for various reasons on that, but I know that JFO and Cadmus have been in touch, and Agency of Natural Resources, who's managing that Cadmus contract. They have been in touch. I I can't answer that definitively on exactly their relationship with the LEAP modeling. I think they were in touch because for that purpose to get the outputs. So I want to say yes, but I can't say for sure.
Well, and I'll double back to Ms. Manchester and see. I'm just trying to hope that we have we're all using the same container to do our math together.
That is ideal, and one of the reasons I was excited about LEAP. I should also say that the next stage of LEAP is to try to disaggregate the data from a statewide basis to our regions and potentially municipalities to give them more tools to help manage their own energy use at a more local level than statewide. Okay, so getting to the structure of the plan. So we have two overarching themes for the plan, and one is equity and just transitions, and the other is grid evolution. And I'll get into both of those more in a moment. And then we also have different sectors: transportation, thermal, electric sector, where we develop pathways, strategies, and recommendations that are structured to be structured the same way as the climate action plan in order to try to ease consistency there. And all of those are really based on principles and goals. That's the foundation at the bottom of the pyramid. And those are really from the 2016 energy plan, the renewable targets. We are not changing those, keeping those 90 by 2050 targets. Although there are some interim targets that we have made more aggressive or added some interim targets. The Global Warming Solutions Act, greenhouse gas reduction requirements. I mentioned Section 202A earlier, and then administration priorities. It is the administration's energy plan. So think about affordability, which really line up with 202A really well. Affordability, economic development, protecting the most vulnerable, equity, and I throw transparency on there as well.
How are they different from the energy plan, from the reducing of carbon?
That's a requirement of the plan, of the energy plan, is to be consistent with the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's a foundational principle that we don't have any flexibility on. Does that answer your question? That the energy plan?
Well, for example, when the SMEEP program comes up for review, which is a program which uses more carbon than before we had the SMEEP program, when will that come up for review, and how will it be treated according to the plan that you're reporting on?
Right. When is the SMEEP? I'm not sure when the SMEEP comes up for review. We have not advocated in this plan for it to come up for review. I think SMEEP is just in statute. It does have where we evaluate it every year. But really, where I want to go with this slide is just to talk about, in the context of these pathways, strategies, and recommendations, what we try to do with the energy plan is to articulate the different trade-offs that are inherent in any policy. Like I mentioned before, cost effectiveness and economic development, or cost effectiveness and reliability may not, or greenhouse gas requirements may not actually both be able to be achieved by the same certain policy. And so what we want to do is really articulate, well, this is our analysis of cost effectiveness, and that analysis is by a customer perspective, a societal perspective, a utility perspective, or program administrator. And here are the impacts. Well, and here are the impacts of reliability, and then weigh those trade-offs. And hopefully we've done a good job of articulating those and weighing those in the plan. And that's the goal. And so if bringing it back to your question on SMEEP, is that if SMEEP is to come up again, or as we look at any program, well, here are the things we want to look at, and we need to make sure we're articulating the trade-offs and balancing them in this way and looking at it from different perspectives.
Mr. Chair, we're
Yes, sir.
discussing a Global Warming Solutions Act, which focuses on the reduction of carbon. And for 40 years, we have been, as a world, dealt with economic development, which has caused the massive use of carbon and is changing our planet. And those are 40 years of having traded off the use of carbon. And we're, I think, have said that we're not going to do that anymore. So my question was, a couple of years ago, we traded off and decided we're going to spend more carbon for economic development in industry and have the electric ratepayers pick up the tab for that. And I want to know whether that policy is going to change as a result of the Global Warming Solutions Act, or we're just going to continue it.
I see. So the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements are not, and those we have to meet them. So in that context, we're not able to trade off at a statewide level. But I guess we should talk about that program a little bit more. My understanding is that the measures that are being implemented under the self-managed energy efficiency program have more thermal reductions than they would have otherwise. So more fossil reductions than they otherwise would have. As a what we were doing previously was they had an electric energy efficiency charge, and they had to make electric energy efficiency investments. Well, if you by how our greenhouse gas inventory is structured, those electric sector investments are relatively carbon free. And so I think there's a debate, and it depends on how you count the electric sector emissions, but there's a debate as to whether or not that program is more or less carbon reducing than it was previous.
Mr. Chair, I hope we have a chance to take a look at that. This perhaps isn't the time, but I would disagree that the program uses less carbon. It uses more carbon, and that's what we did just a couple of years ago. So maybe we'll take that up in another venue. Thank you.
Sure, I'll put it on a list for committee work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And to be clear, I was talking about the self-managed energy efficiency program. I just hopefully that was the same program. But
no, and I was talking about carbon. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we elevated the draft energy plan. Elevates equity as a key theme in the plan, and it really leverages the great work done by the Climate Council and the Just Transition Subcommittee that grounded the energy plan in core concepts and guiding principles. And we infuse equity discussion, as it should be, throughout all the sectoral chapters where it's relevant for policy and program recommendations. You need to stop and say we recognize that the work was really good in the Climate Council, and the Climate Council itself recognized that a lot more work needs to be done in terms of exactly how we consider equity, how we get procedural equity to have more of the frontline communities participate in the decision-making process. But the plan itself includes that equity should really be considered as a core criteria in all decision-making, alongside with least cost and environmentally sound principles that I mentioned earlier. And what's on the slide here, that's really the why, is because we all benefit if society is more fair and just.
I'll flag while we're going by this one and want to come back and validate this with you later. One thing we're looking at is revising the RES and going to 100% renewable sooner. And one of the reasons for that is because I'm not sure if there's any other tool that can ensure that every single household is part of that clean energy future. It is the only tool I can think of that makes everyone part of the clean energy future. As in, when you turn the switch, you're getting 100% renewable energy through your panel into your home. And so that's a different take on it. Most of our prior discussions, prior years, were around things like greenhouse gas emissions. And this is really like a new lens on it. And I'd like to, just place that in your in basket as something to come back to as a construct that advances what we mean by, beneficial electrification, making it more beneficial sooner, but also adds a social justice or equity lens to the discussion that we didn't look at before. So just while we're going by this screen, so thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. The other core theme is of the energy plan is grid evolution. As we move away from fossil fuels, any scenario that met our greenhouse gas requirements required a lot of electrification. I don't think that's any surprise to you all. But also increasing amounts of distributed energy resources, and that by distributed energy resources, I mean really both generating resources and load-based resources that are connected to the grid. The load-based resources, I mean the heat pumps, I mean the EVs and the other technologies that are producing the services that we want affordably and cleanly. But also in grid evolution, we're talking about the visibility of load through sensors and meters so that the load can be orchestrated to make sure that the electricity supply meets demand where it's at. The time of the supply, the time that generation occurs is where, we're meeting demand with it. And we can do that a number of ways through load management. What the plan doesn't do is lay out kind of a stepwise plan for us to reinvent the grid. That really would be out of date as soon as it was published. So what we do is to try and lay out a vision and a set of principles for consideration as it relates to evolving the grid in the policy considerations, in the regulatory sphere, and other venues to future-proof decision-making. One example of that could be that when a device interconnects, that it has the same that it's able to communicate with the control platforms that of the utilities in order to help manage the grid for the benefit of all. And the customers get benefit out of this too, because they can participate in programs and lower costs, lower their own costs. Those in exchange for controlling a controllable device that a customer could receive a credit on its bill, and then ratepayers save as well. It's kind of a shared savings approach.
Are you the committee I received and distributed onto this committee, and I just want to make sure you got it. I think you must have. I received it from Ms. Bailey at VIPSA. It's a memo outlining grid modernization requests and quantifying them in terms of money. And it's, in the end, it's a fairly stunning figure of $2.2 billion. And
right.
So I figure you have a copy of that as well.
Yes, we do have a copy of that. Thank you. And so those are grid investments. Those don't necessarily all need to be right away. They don't all need to be borne by utilities. And some of those investments will by themselves be cost effective. So kind of like how the weatherization discussion goes, where we often talk about the big price tag, we have to talk about it in the context of the benefits as well. And there's a lot of good that can come out of managing load to kind of either defer or avoid altogether some of those costs. So up on the screen, I won't read it for you, but that is the vision for an optimized grid that comes out of the plan. So now I'm gonna go into each sector really briefly, the electric, transportation, and thermal sectors, to talk about the recommendations, the pathways, and the strategies in the plan. And so, but first I start with a picture on each one. And like I said earlier, we could get into a whole lot more detail. I have a lot more charts if you're interested in them on each sector. But just to give a bit of context, what you're seeing now is, by the way, I think that's a critical role of the energy plan, is to provide information and context on all our energy sources, and so and where we are now. So what you see on the screen is something you've seen before. This is the 2020 version of it, of our electric energy deliveries on the left as contracted or owned resources. They're called physical energy deliveries in the ISO market parlance, but really it doesn't necessarily mean that the electrons actually get to Vermont. So contracted and owned resources on the left to meet our supply. You can see a little over a quarter nuclear, 40% hydro. We have a number of other 10% solar, another 10 wind, and biomass from McNeil and Reigate, some landfill gas, and then 2% just met by the system mix, so unallocated, kind of those real-time purchases. After retirement of renewable energy credits, on the right is what you see that the mix turns into. So our utilities sell the biomass and a portion of the solar renewable energy credits, and replace those with hydro credits. And so we're still a quarter nuclear, but and then more like 70% hydro. So what is the goal and the pathway in the electric sector? So we've set a goal for 100% carbon free in 10 years. And our pathway is consistent with the Climate Action Plan pathway, is to have a comprehensive Public Utility Commission review of RES design, renewable energy standard design, and complementary programs, and options to meet the 100% carbon free. And that's really reviewing each of the programs and the trade-offs. We have net metering. How do we better get community solar or other affordable clean energy programs to allow more folks to participate in the clean energy transition? The standard offer program, really examining, one of the reasons we recommend a Public Utility Commission review is because these details can get very technical very quickly, and having a discussion on the record, a transparent discussion with a commission report seems appropriate for things like, how do we best value the time, best value resources based on their time that they supply power and their location. As you know, within Vermont, there are different values for generation if you're in the northern part of the state versus the southern part of the state, or on different circuits, and there's different values for when resources produce. And so can we better align our supply and demand? And the locational extends to in-state versus out-of-state as well. Should we, how should we encourage more in-state distributed generation and balance that with recognizing that we're part of a regional grid and have potentially cost-effective resources, renewable resources available to us from elsewhere in the region or interconnecting regions like Quebec or New York. And then new versus existing generation. How much do we want to push? Our tier 1 of our renewable energy standard now is existing generation. And how much tier 2 requires new, anything after 2015. And so what is the correct balance? And there's a lot of trade-offs here. I think, if, for instance, is there a way in HET this morning, Representative Yantachka recognized that net metering is more expensive than standard offer solar. So asking the question, is there a way to reduce the costs of net metering while still allowing for the opportunity to self-generate, and then get other resources, other new resources at a lower cost, and potentially move the needle that way and get more than what we would otherwise be getting under the current paradigm. So there's a lot of different considerations, and this is only some of them, but siting considerations are probably another one that is best well suited for the PUC as well. We've seen increased amounts of net metering every year, installed net metering every year over the last many years, and reviewing our siting practices to make sure that they're well sited.
Two quick things. One, we worked a lot in this committee, as you recall, on Act 174, the siting law, several years back, and I've heard concerns expressed over the summer and fall about that maybe it isn't playing the role that we thought it might play, or so we have more to learn about how it's being used, interpreted, etc., and see maybe it needs some touching up. The other thing is, can you distinguish for the committee? A phrase we used for years was 100% renewable energy by 2030, 2032, and this one is carbon free. So can you just distinguish what renewable versus carbon free entails?
Right. So carbon free includes nuclear is probably the biggest distinction. It opens the door for nuclear, I should say. It also in Vermont, Hydro-Quebec is defined by statute as renewable. In other states, it is not. Although I will note that other states like Massachusetts in their clean energy standard have now actively made changes to include Hydro-Quebec as a resource that meets their clean energy standard. Other states are also procuring in clean energy standards or procuring clean energy resources that are either nuclear or large hydro or offshore wind or anything else that we traditionally think of as renewable.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that helpful? Yeah. So moving on to the thermal and process fuels, our current picture here, this is from EIA data on the left. So the most recent is 2019, about 25% wood and other renewables. Our goal was 25% renewable by 2025. And so we are just about there. And the rest is fossil fuel based. Something this committee is very familiar with is our pace of weatherization. We had the 80,000 units by 2020 goal. We made it to 30,000 units by 2020. I won't go on there. I think this committee is very familiar with that. So for thermal sector, our goal is to increase renewable supply to 30% by 2025. So up that increases the previous goal, and then sets targets for 10 years and 20 years from now. How are we going to do that? The first pathway is to reduce energy demand, weatherization at scale. There's been an EAN working group that has been working on proposing pathways or methods to get to weatherization at scale. The energy plan, it agrees with those recommendations and adopts them. It calls for as much funding as capacity will allow in the next several years. And then in the long term, and that's using as much federal funding as capacity will allow over the next several years. And then in the long term, exploring more options for sustainable funding. And those, this goes a little beyond what that working group worked on, but really exploring partnerships with the healthcare industry, who, if weatherized homes actually are healthier homes, less asthma incidents, less COPD, pulmonary disease. And so it's kind of a win-win. So we need to better partner with the healthcare industry. And also last summer, the Department of Financial Regulation put out a report detailing the impacts to the property insurance industry from climate change. You think about weatherization, weatherized house will have less ice dams, for example. And so the property insurance industry should be, engaged in making homes healthy, whether that's, and we want to explore options and set up pathways there that could lead to sustainable funding sources. The other source, I'll talk about a clean heat standard in a moment, but is to have a carve out for weatherization in a clean heat standard, if such a clean heat standard is in the interest of the state. But continuing on reduced energy demand, efficient buildings, we have building energy standards. We continue with the goal of net zero ready by 2030, and then state energy management program enhancements that have already started, but continue them and expand upon them, where the buildings and general services has the state energy management program, where they have a revolving loan fund to make investments in their facilities, to expand that to municipalities and potentially schools, in order to, one, help walk through the process of getting a project done, but then also potentially helping to fund it through a revolving loan fund. The other pathway here is low carbon technologies and fuel choices. I mentioned the clean heat standard is really to consider that. That's an obligation on either wholesale or retail providers of fuel to reduce carbon. And one of the reasons it's still unclear whether wholesale providers is really something the state can do, is putting an obligation on, because they're in Albany, in Manchester, in Quebec are the wholesale providers. So we really need to have a little more understanding on if that is possible, and then better understanding the costs and in potential designs. So our recommendation is to have the PUC study it this year, and then if it looks reasonable, then to authorize the PUC to implement such a program. It was a two-step process. And the plan then goes on to talk about clean fuels and technologies, including cold climate heat pumps and other heat pumps, advanced wood heat and district heat, biofuels, renewable natural gas. I should add, in response to public comments, we have suggested we look into hydrogen. So we've added a little summary on hydrogen as well, even though right now it looks still pretty nascent, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't kind of have it in the toolbox as a potential use. So that's thermal and process. Moving on to transportation, we mostly fossil fuels powering our transportation now is the short story here. We have 4 pathways in the transportation and land use chapter. And I should say, Bronwyn Cook from ACCD is watching the live stream, I believe. I didn't get it together this morning to try and get her here on the land use pieces. If there's questions there, she may be best able to answer. And then Michelle Boomhauer wasn't able to make it today. It might be, if you have detailed questions on the transport sector, she'd be happy to talk. But the pathways, vehicle electrification, the vehicle incentives, light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, mileage smart program, replace your ride, calling out these programs and providing support for these programs. Infrastructure and policy, which is really infrastructure piece, a lot maybe closer to the Department of Public Services wheelhouse, especially the rate design and load control. That one's in bold just because it ties in so closely to the grid evolution. Really important to manage the new load that's coming on. We discuss EV charging price transparency and have a recommendation for our ag agency to manage that. Talk about vehicle dealer awareness and talk about just highlighting the issue of the road user charges and transportation fund impacts. And VTrans is in the process of doing a study on that and awaiting that for next steps. Pathway 2 is cleaner vehicles and fuels. The California Advanced Clean Cars regulations, you can either choose to join California in their environmental regulations or the feds in their environmental regulations. And Vermont has, on vehicles, Vermont has joined California historically, and they're revising those regulations, and the Agency of Natural Resources participating in that process, and our recommendation is to continue to do that and continue to choose to have the California regulations be applicable to Vermont. What that requires is 100% zero emission vehicle sales in the state by 2035. And then also to monitor biofuels and low carbon fuel development. How can biodiesel and biofuels play a role? I should also mention those California regulations. There's also an Advanced Clean Trucks 2 regulation, was omitted from the draft inadvertently, will be in the final version that we also want to comply with that. On the land use side, we also have 2 pathways on the land use side. We really spend more time than past energy plans because this is really important on land use, I think. And while we don't call out a specific vehicle miles traveled goal that might be a result of land use decisions, we really do spend a lot of time talking about how we can really better integrate land use planning into transportation decision-making frameworks. That's, believe it or not, government agencies sometimes are siloed. And so we want to align planning across government agencies and then continue and enhance support for compact development and smart growth designation programs. And then finally, in the transportation land use, really just continuing to increase transportation choices. We're not forcing any of these options on anybody, and that's a theme throughout the plan that we want to encourage customer choice and then customers to choose the right thing that helps meet energy policy objectives. In this case, increasing choices means the public transit, rail, biking and walking, complete streets, those types of policies that really can help not only increase the choice. Yeah, anybody could walk, but they're not going to do it if there's not a good sidewalk or a safe a safe spot to, walk into town. So making sure that's available.
What, Mr. Chair, are we talking about free buses, or are we going to charge for? I mean, I'm going to choose to take one sort of transportation depending on what it costs, not what type of transportation it is. So I can design any transportation system that no one would choose if you gave me free rein. So when you say choice,
That's a very,
how do
very
you
good point.
create a system that people choose to use?
Correct. That it was my intent to take it there, and I kind of left it short. So thank you, Senator. That you don't want to just have the option that nobody chooses it. That'll be a waste of money and resources. So,
Senator Campion.
Thanks. TJ, are there any guidelines that the state has for where sidewalks go? In other words, related to population, or is it one of these things where it's sort of just negotiated locally, puts their, argument forward? Are there anything like that? Like if
so this is where if she's watching, I'm sure, and not able to access right now, but Bronwyn from ACCD would be able to best answer this really well. I'm going to struggle through it though, in that there is a complete streets legislation that was passed maybe 10 years ago, and that called for when road infrastructure investments are made in a town, or when roads are being redone, that you really need to evaluate and look at making sure that there's sidewalks and room for public transit, and to make sure that the streets encourage these public and active transportation options. And so that has been on the books for a while. I think the plan talks about areas where we could improve that, and that's probably about as deep as I can go on it right now.
that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, one of our challenges is that there are over a century, trillions of dollars of money spent in support of particular modes of transportation, building out roads and it goes hand in glove with the automobile industry and the fossil fuel industry. But when we want to do sidewalks, somehow there's not the same business interest in seeing the sidewalks developed. So it comes across as sort of a begrudging expense that we make on behalf of the public, but we don't measure it against what we already invested as the public on behalf of those other modalities. So I watched a sidewalk in a town I lived in. People didn't want to put it in for 20 years because they would have to the town would plow it. They'd become responsible for maintaining it. So
there's, Mr. Chair, when you design roads so that people can live far apart from neighbors and other things, and people live far away from stores and theaters and other things, sidewalks aren't worth spit, because you can't walk there.
Right.
You need sidewalks only where things are within walking distance.
Sure. And I'm just thinking there.
I don't know if that's completely accurate. I mean, there are people that just recreate, want to go for a walk. They live on a busy road. They, just for recreational purposes. It's. I think we're making a mistake. There always doesn't have to be I've got to get to the grocery store.
Sure. Well,
I know many people that get in their car and drive to a place to take a walk.
That's what we want to avoid. Too many.
Well, let's.
Thank you for making my point, Senator McDowell.
Agreed.
Well, so let's, I'd say we want to make the doing quote unquote the right thing the default, not like you have to make an extra effort, because the not right things have been made a default. So with that, let's keep on going, and
So
we know
only,
there's more to
only
talk
a
about.
couple more slides here, and then I'll be done. So just there's a number of other energy plan components that I didn't go into a ton of detail here, or any detail in some of them. One is energy finance. There's a chapter on energy finance, really identifying that we don't have a financial driver, kind of a mission driven, where their finance entity is their whole mission, reason for being is to improve, is to meet our energy policy needs. And so, we've already actually, and so we've recommended establishing a collaborative, and that's EHFA, the Vermont Bond Bank, and VITA, that along with others, kind of get together and really see what the opportunities are. Not reinventing the wheel necessarily, but maybe not reinventing the wheel, but seeing where we can use our existing authorities to really pick up the pace on financing availability, because people either have an inability to finance or an aversion for financing. And so, and in response to that, I should say those three entities have already organized in response to the draft plan. They've already organized and started to work on this issue. So I think really success of that chapter. We do have a state agency energy plan. This is the Buildings and General Services Lead by Example plan on what they're going to do with the state-owned buildings and state-leased buildings. We have the enhanced energy planning standards. We've updated the guidelines, and that will be in an appendix to the energy plan. We'll include modeling appendices that show us what we did in the scenarios and how we did it, and those are aligned with the climate action plan, as I mentioned before. And we also have a renewable energy standard report that is a separate requirement. We do it every year, but this year it's going to be submitted as an appendix to the energy plan.
On the energy planning standards, we had 3 years at, I think, $300,000 a year. The department plus VLCT did training to help municipalities and RPCs develop energy components that were consistent with the state energy goals. Do you have a sense of, the hope was, but it was just a hope, that 3 years of funding and outreach, technical assistance plus funding would be enough to help transition enough municipalities and RPCs that they would become kind of the seed for others a template for others to follow. And do you have any thoughts on whether or not we've done enough so far, or whether or not we need to explicitly do more outreach to support both towns and RPCs to update their energy elements to be consistent with the CEP?
So I think, so the original Act 174 Enhanced Energy Planning Standards, that same kind of pathway happened, as I understand it. It was when I wasn't at the department, but that some RPCs went first, and then others used that as a template to move forward. Just in looking at a number of the comments to our draft plan, that they do say more support is needed. And so I guess I can't go too much deeper on that. I would need to, I can get back to you with a better answer. I think I check with some folks at our office who are more closely engaged in this issue.
Okay, great, thank you. We want people to succeed, and 3 years was what the budget allowed for at that point, and so let's revisit and help people get to a place where they are more self-sufficient.
One of the, I actually was planning on mentioning that in terms of the public comments we've received, is that one of the areas of support, they're looking for more support to help implement. And if we're tasking municipalities or RPCs to do things, that we can't just make it unfunded in our energy plan and unfunded mandates. And I guess I'm fairly sympathetic to that unfunded mandate, just from some of the things the department has to do. But we other public comments are I'm just going to talk about a couple of them and how we're responding, just because we're kind of in that weird spot here between the draft and the final. We've gotten a number of comments on specific technologies. The plan doesn't promote enough of technology X, whether it's, I mentioned hydrogen earlier, wind is another one. And really how we respond to that is that the plan isn't intending to pick winners or losers in specific technologies. We want to encourage the frameworks that will encourage the technology that meets our needs. So whether it's better setting up a time value framework in the electric sector or a locational framework in the electric sector, are a couple of examples there. We don't want to say this technology, because as soon as we say that, it's going to change. Back 20 years ago, we were actively switching people off of electricity to propane. I got a incentive for my propane dryer. We were kind of picking that winner. So we really need to be careful about that. And we want to, again, we're trying to articulate the balance and the trade-offs between and how we should look at things, and so that we don't get into that that rut where we're picking a winner.
Can I ask you a little bit more about that one?
Yeah.
So, as you know, that the legislature comes under pressure, or we create our own to pick winners. And so what's the best way for us to work through those? I mean, is it to engage with the PUC and the department particularly to do this sort of analysis we were talking about earlier, like LEAP and remedy? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, it's part of it. I think that's part of it. I think the part of it is where possible to set up, the legislature to direct the program and say, this is what we want, these principles, right? Just like 202A is, but we want projects that do X, that are located in the best spot, that generate electricity at the time it's needed. And then it can be up to whether it's the PUC or whoever else has oversight over the market to actually put out a solicitation or do the analysis that says, okay, we're looking for projects that do X, Y, and Z. And those, and then you kind of get those projects, keeping in mind that those needs change over time. So it needs to be kind of flexible enough to say, well, this location is no longer a problem or no longer beneficial. We want to focus elsewhere. And if the PUC, I live in the regulatory world of the PUC a lot, so I end up heading in that direction. There may be other options, but if the PUC can then has the flexibility to change, that can happen a little more nimbly than the legislature at times. And I think that's kind of the direction I would go, if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
The other couple of things I just wanted to mention, we had the most comments on the electric sector, and we are including a whole lot more information in that sector. We think a lot of the comments were fair, honestly, that we omitted discussion of, or our discussion was light on issue X, Y, or Z. And so I just want to point out, if you've read the plan or looked at the plan previously, that the electric sector is going to be a little more robust. At the highest level, though, it doesn't change the pathway or the strategy of really looking at our renewable energy standard and our carbon-free goal, and trying to design the best program that balances the trade-offs. I think well, the last one I'll say is, it was related to a little related to the Act 174 plan, but equity has been a theme that we heard a lot before the release of the draft and after. And so in terms of wanting, and these might not have been directed directly at the plan itself, but just wanting to, citing of projects, making sure that the benefits and the burdens of siting are evenly distributed across the state. And so it's the folks that have had projects cited in their communities that they still, even despite Act 174 and processes going forward, they still didn't feel like they had a voice. And so I think our theme of equity kind of goes throughout, and I just wanted to elevate that for you all to know that we're hearing that as well. I think I'll stop there. We had that's just a sampling of some of the comments, but there's things that we're trying to think about and revising over or enhancing the plan over the next, well, we've been doing it and we have about a week and a half left.
Yeah, so when do you anticipate publishing a final plan?
That will be, it's due on the 15th. So that's a Saturday, and I don't know if that means that it will come on the 14th. I'm planning for the 14th. So
you're not going to be in on Saturday to hit the send button. Right. So a quick question, and we need to come back to it on Act 174 and planning and siting, since it's a bigger issue. Do you happen to know if towns that were expressing, or parties, I don't know if they're necessarily municipalities, that were expressing concern about a lack of control over or influence over siting decisions? Do you know off the top of your head whether or not they were towns that had a certified town energy element in their plan, which was to gain them, we thought, that substantial deference on the part of the PUC was, my phrasing at the time was the teeter-totter tips, from you're going to have to convince the PUC to now the PUC is going to have to convince you that that the siting recommendation shouldn't be followed. How's that?
So there were, the ones that I brought up and we're thinking about are really individuals, and some of them, some of it was just those projects that had been cited before Act 174 was in full effect. And then some of it, like in the Sheffield area, for instance, some of it was projects that probably related to a misunderstanding of what they've done and how their plan got deference. Like a plan that was, they did a plan, but it wasn't approved, and it didn't meet the guidelines, and so it didn't get approved. And then others were totally different from that. And again, these are all individuals. And was related to in Fairhaven, there's a hydro project that they didn't feel they could get sited, and they were having trouble getting it sited. And that is not necessarily a PUC issue, but a broader, hydro brings up FERC, Federal Energy Regulation Agency of Natural Resources. And so there's a broad range of kind of wanting to have control over the energy resources in their service territory. So, or not service territory, in their community.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Well, we'll have to dig back into that. I know at the time when we did it, we were kind of having siting wars, and it's calmed down a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean that we got it completely right, but I'm hopeful.
It has calmed down.
Yeah.
You'll note that the 2016 energy plan had one of the themes was siting, and this time around it's definitely included. It didn't go away, but it is not the high level focus, and that part of that is because the wars have settled a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. So I just want to look to the committee and see if you have any other questions for Mr. Poor while he's visiting with us. Sarah McCormick.
Thanks. To what extent, carrying on with the idea that the siting wars have calmed down, to what extent have they calmed down because we're doing less siting? Or are we actually doing a better job of siting? It seems to me, for example, with solar, we got a lot of parking lots and flat rooftops and things, industrial places where the aesthetic problem is moot. I mean, they're already ugly, and and yet also exposed to the sun, ill-used gravel pits for that matter. Are we siting better or are we siting less?
Maybe siting differently. There's a chart in the energy plan that shows the net metering installations, and that continues to, we now have almost 300 megawatts of net metering sited, so that it's continued. Cumulatively, we're still siting 25 to 30 megawatts a year of solar. What hasn't been cited, I think we haven't seen kind of the Kingdom Community Wind or Sheffield big wind projects, and maybe that's a part of it. But other resources have continued to be cited. There was a pellet plant, for instance, that went to be sited in Fairhaven that didn't ultimately happen. I don't know a lot of the details of that one, but there are other projects that have been going through the process.
But in terms of numbers, more than there was a few years ago, less, more than we need, less than we need?
Well, need is subjective. We have sufficient projects to meet the current tier 2 of the renewable energy standard, and so that pace has been increasing over time. So if that's the measure of need, then there's I guess I'll leave that at there.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Anything else? All right.
Senator
Westman.
Just one comment in all of this, and what occurs to me in all of this, whether we're talking about grid or we're talking about, the siting of more places or anything like that, all of it will totally be changed when we get battery storage that is in a real, and what I know about the industry in that is we're on the edge of that. how is that incorporated in the thinking of all of this? Because we haven't mentioned it at all. If you're in the Shia where you can't develop any large projects because the transmission lines, people don't apply for anything because of that. Battery storage will begin to alleviate some of that problem. And so since it hasn't been mentioned and isn't, where is it in this plan?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Senator. That it was an oversight of mine in that I didn't mention it in the grid evolution chapter. Is really where it's addressed and how we manage our resources. And you're right, we're on the edge of the long duration storage, which would really change the game for how the grid evolves and reliability and resilience. I think that in the current storage technology is becoming more cost effective, but it doesn't last quite as long. We discuss it in the grid evolution chapter in terms of it being a mechanism to really help us meet, like I said, the electric demand with the supply in the right time. We're also, there's a storage rulemaking underway at the Public Utility Commission to talk about interconnection procedures and ways to how to address siting of storage and whether it's independent or with a generating resource. And I believe it's kind of a periphery issue. There's the interconnection rule and the net metering rule, and those rules talk to each other, and storage is kind of in both of those discussions as well. And so it's really, how do we use storage to help us kind of move the needle on cost effectiveness? Again, time locational value. Is it that we're encouraging pairing storage with resources to solve those problems? They're all good questions, and we really raise a lot of those questions in the energy plan and try and talk about what we should think about as we analyze them. But we are, upfront that we don't have all the answers quite yet, so we have some processes to go through.
I would just say, I think it gets that the grid piece backs into the question. In the northwest part of the state, people aren't bringing projects up for renewable energy projects because the grid can't handle it. And every time I drive by the wind towers in Georgia and in Lowell, and I see them not running, when the wind is blowing, it makes me really sad because we aren't taking advantage of stuff that we could. So as we get closer and we're on the edge of it, how can we push along storage with, in planning efforts and financially? Is there things that we could do to, with resources to push along the storage, which I think will alleviate a lot of the issues, both grid-wise and siting issues, and make us better use what we already have.
I think that's a really good point. We do have about 50 megawatts of storage, either permitted, either built already, about 30 megawatts built, and another 20 that are permitted and under construction. And so we want to make sure, that it's not just storage, but it is storage that is meeting those policy needs, and that is in the right spot that helps expand the amount of generation we can cite for sure.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks I've written down storage again on my list. So there are plenty of ongoing issues that the serious thing is that it's a once in a century evolution of the grid. And so there's a lot happening, and it's a lot to keep up with. So thank you very much, Mr. Poor, for coming in and helping us take a walk through the comprehensive energy plan. The conversation tells me that we're going to be coming back, just as we suggested at the outset, to go a deeper dive on particular aspects. And now I'd like to turn to Mr. Sterling, who asked to join us to talk about, I think, a REV response to the CEP. And so good to see you back in the, quote unquote, back in the building, Mr. Sterling. The floor is yours, and let's wrap up for the morning.
Great. Well, thank you so much. My name is Peter Sterling, and for the record, I'm the interim executive director of Renewable Energy Vermont, the trade association representing Vermont's clean energy industry. I'd like to just make 3 quick points about what REV sees as shortcomings in the department's comprehensive energy plan. First, it's the concept of additionality. Additionality really needs to be the cornerstone of any climate change mitigation policy. Additionality, as defined by the Kyoto Protocols, means that energy resources must result in reductions in emissions that are additional to any that would occur in the absence of the activity. So the comprehensive energy plan fails this additionality test, both looking forward into the future and looking backwards. Looking forward, the plan fails to identify and provide specific steps the state of Vermont could take to achieve a decarbonized electric sector and to prepare for the future we all know is coming, one where really electric loads will be driven by vehicle and building electrification. So we don't have any specific steps about how we're going to get our new clean energy. Exacerbating this problem, the plan says, and I quote, "There's no reasonable argument to effectively exclude existing renewable resources that have served Vermont for decades, and any revised RES should consider the earlier portfolio requirements and goals that informed utility-owned resources and long-term contracts," end quote. Or put another way, the Department of Public Service apparently believes that instead of bringing online new renewable energy resources to solve the climate crisis, an acceptable solution is allowing utilities to be given credit for renewables built decades ago and allowing these existing resources to be counted toward meeting their future energy goals under the RES. Second point I'd like just to make is that the plan misrepresents the scale of the recent loss of clean energy jobs here in Vermont. The plan cites figures from the annual Clean Energy Industry Report prepared by the department that the number of clean energy jobs has increased by 18% between 2014 and 2021. When the department kind of cherry picks this number, it glosses over the fact that according to this same report, the employment in the clean energy industry has actually decreased by 1,579 jobs since the industry's high watermark in 2017, when over 19,000 Vermonters were employed in the sector. And all this is despite the fact that we need more clean energy and more clean energy jobs as we try to transition off fossil fuels to avoid a climate crisis. I would also like to add that if another industry had lost 1,500 jobs in the last 4 years, I think we'd be hearing a lot more from this administration about what we should be doing to prop up those jobs. If I can go outside of my technological wheelhouse and try to screen share, which would be a miracle if I pull this off. Oh, there it is. Here's a chart I prepared that looks at the impact of the job loss of since net metering has been wound down. You can see that roughly 4 years ago, about 7,000 Vermonters were employed, and then we started moving on different net metering changes to reduce the supports. Now we have roughly 5,500 people employed in the renewable energy sector. That's a 21% decrease since 2016. And this chart is also included in the testimony that I submitted electronically, so y'all can read that if you want longer, so I'll stop the sharing. My last point I just would love to make real quick is regarding getting solar projects permitted through the PUC. I heard the committee discuss this a little bit with TJ. Rev does not agree with the plan statement that, quote, under any reasonable measure, the existing siting process allows well-sited generation projects to be built in Vermont, end quote. Rev members have long documented how the existing siting process is unpredictable and unnecessarily time-consuming and adds extra cost and uncertainty to the construction of solar projects for all but the very smallest size projects. We believe that serious reform of the siting process is necessary if Vermont's going to be able to meet its goals for in-state renewable energy procurement. And to Senator McCormick's point, before I wrap up, I believe that many of the rulings we've had over the last few years have led to a real chilling effect based on what I've heard from my members. They don't even bother applying for ground-sited projects anymore that are not preferred sites, like you said, on landfills or on rooftops, because they know it'll be too painful a process to get through. And I'd like to just bring one project, wrap up with a description of one project that the PUC rejected for a CPG. MHG Solar sought a CPG to build a 500 kilowatt project on Richville Road in Manchester. Contrary to the Department of Public Services' own aesthetics expert, who concluded the project would not have an undue adverse effect on aesthetics, the PUC's hearing officer stated in his report that, quote, the project would have an undue adverse impact on aesthetics because the project would be out of character with its surroundings and would significantly diminish the scenic qualities of the area, here it is, such that it would offend the sensibilities of the average person, end quote. As justification for this statement, his report noted that drivers on Richville Road would be able to view the solar panels for approximately 26 seconds as they drove by, and that approximately 10 residences or businesses near or adjacent to the project would have visibility of the project, though he does not actually provide a citation for this claim. I guess what I'd like to wrap by saying is, if we have a permitting process that does not ask Vermonters to look at solar panels for 26 seconds as they drive by, I don't see how Vermont will ever be able to do its part to stop the climate crisis and really transition us off of fossil fuels. So thank you for your time today on this.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I know that every siting case ends up being a little bit of an onion. You peel away a layer and then there's another and another and another. But I've heard about the Manchester situation as kind of a poster child for unhappiness on one outcome at the PUC. So I think we will allocate committee time to dig into that and understand better what happened and what's happening.
Right. I think Rev members would really be appreciative of that, Senator Bray, you taking time to dive into what's right and what's wrong with the process and how we can all work together to reform it.
Right. Inefficiency and unpredictability, or unpredictability, time delays, it's not in anyone's favor.
Right.
We hear about that on any kind of permitted process. So I think the goal is a fair, efficient, predictable process so that people can proceed with some confidence from the outset, as opposed to feeling like it's a roll of the dice or something like that.
Right.
Okay. Well, so we are at 12 and actually a minute over. So thank you for everyone to hang in there. And with that, we are going to wrap for the day. Tomorrow we'll be returning to weatherization to learn where we